In this video, we will investigate energy flow in ecosystems. The ultimate source of energy for living organisms is the sun. This is where our energy comes from, and that energy must be harnessed and transformed into usable types of energy. This is usually done by our producers. And then energy will flow up our trophic levels from producers to consumers. One thing that is important to note is that all energy follows the laws of thermodynamics. The first law of thermodynamics is conservation of energy. This means that energy cannot be created or destroyed, it can only be transformed. So, when energy enters ecosystems as solar radiation, it's converted to different forms by living organisms. The second law of thermodynamics has to do with energy exchange rates. Every exchange of energy increases the entropy of the universe. This means that we lose some usable energy and it becomes an unusable form like heat. Another way of saying this is that energy conversions are not efficient. Some energy is always going to be lost. In this diagram, we can see the energy flow. It starts with the solar energy coming from the sun. Our plants are going to harness that energy and transform it into chemical energy such as food, sugars, and carbohydrates. With each conversion, we see that there is a loss of heat. When animals eat plants, they are going to use that energy in a different form. So they transform it using cellular respiration. And again, we see loss of heat at every step. Organisms can be organized into trophic levels. This is based on how they get their energy and what they eat. Our first layer, or trophic level, are the primary producers. These are the organisms that capture the light from the sun and transform it into chemical energy such as sugars. These primary producers are also autotrophs, which means that they produce their own sugars. Autotrophs include things like kelp, phytoplankton, cyanobacteria, and plants. Most of these organisms can use photosynthesis to harness the sun's energy. Other organisms are classified as consumers. The first level are the primary consumers. These are our herbivores. They eat plant material and take in energy from those plants. Secondary consumers are carnivores. These guys eat the primary consumers. Tertiary consumers are also carnivorous, and they eat the secondary consumers. Generally, our trophic cascade or trophic levels don't go higher than tertiary or quaternary consumers. These carnivores, quaternary consumers, are usually our top predators. Consumers are also known as heterotrophs. Heterotrophs gain energy from consuming other organisms. Many organisms are multi-level consumers. A good example is omnivores. Omnivores eat both plant material and animal material. This means that they will be in both the primary consumer level and the secondary consumer level. There are many examples of omnivores: raccoons, foxes, chimps, pigs, dogs, bears, and humans are all omnivores. There are other types of heterotrophs or consumers out there as well. Detritivores or decomposers are organisms such as fungi and bacteria that break down the waste products and dead materials left in the ecosystem. These organisms gain energy from that dead and decaying material, and they also help to cycle nutrients. Decomposers are very important in their ecosystem. Without these decomposers, we would have a vast buildup of waste material within just a few days. Food chains are one way to organize our trophic levels. The arrows in a food chain flow in the same direction as the energy flows. So we see in this basic food chain that we have energy flowing from the sun to our primary producers, the plants. Energy will then flow from the plants to the primary consumers, as the primary consumers eat the plants. And energy flows from the primary consumer to the secondary consumer, and from the secondary consumer to the tertiary consumer. Food chains are a linear depiction of energy flow in an ecosystem. However, these food chains are not usually the whole picture. Most organisms have multiple foods in their diet, so this is only one pathway that energy can take. Another way of depicting energy flow through an ecosystem is a food web. Food webs involve harvesting energy from multiple stops in the food chain. This means that there are multiple food chains involved, and this is a more accurate depiction of what's actually going on in the ecosystem. Here's an example of a food web on a savanna. We see that there are several types of plants and many types of herbivores. Most of these herbivores eat multiple types of plants. We see that this intricate set of interconnections and energy flow is much more accurate of what's going on in this ecosystem. Remember, we've said that as energy flows, we lose some energy at every step. Energy transformations are inefficient. In fact, energy transfer among organisms is highly inefficient. There is only about a 10% energy efficiency moving from one trophic level to another. This means that the producers may have a huge amount of energy available to them, but only about 10% of it will move up to the primary consumers. In this graphic below, we see that the primary producers have 10,000 joules of energy. Only about 10%, or 1,000 joules, will move up to the primary consumers. 10% of that energy will go to the secondary consumers, leaving us with 100 joules. By the time we reach the tertiary level, there are only 10 joules of energy available. This energy efficiency is the reason that our food chains are generally so short. There's very little energy moving from level to level, which limits the number of animals that can actually be tertiary consumers. So the decrease of energy at each level is due to the loss as heat. Each time there's a transfer of energy, we see some energy lost as heat. The 10% rule also applies for biomass. Biomass is the amount of matter in each organism at each level. Again, we see that there may be a lot of biomass in the producers, but only 10% of those materials are actually available and moved into the primary consumers. When we move from primary to secondary consumers, only about 10% is converted to new biomass in the secondary consumers. So, if we look at the biomass and 10% rule, where does the rest of that mass go? Much of that mass and energy is actually lost in feces. Plant material is made of many compounds that animals cannot digest, things like cellulose. So a great deal of what these organisms eat is actually not available to them. The rest of the biomass and energy will be used for things like growth or adding new biomass and cellular respiration to get energy to maintain their living systems. As energy transfers from organism to organism, we also see that mass and nutrients can transfer from organism to organism. When organisms die, consumers, producers, or otherwise, they are always decomposed by the decomposers. These detritivores take and cycle nutrients and add them back to the ecosystem so that other organisms can use them. During that time, they also gain energy from that dead and decaying material. This allows them to grow and maintain their bodies. This video covered the energy flow through ecosystems. Remember that energy cannot be created or destroyed, it can only be transformed, and each of these transformations is highly inefficient, meaning that only about 10% of energy and biomass moves from trophic level to trophic level.